So then, without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Lewis, who has a lot to tell us. And so welcome, Lewis. We're delighted to have you. Please take it away.
Thank you. So I'm going to switch my own screen to gallery so I get to see all of you. It's one of those ways that helps me feel more with all of you. And as she just said, I love it if you all put your video on, so I feel even more with you. But of course, it's your personal choice. I get to see you, and then you get to ask me questions, etc. So I love beginning what I want to share by first making clear that the biggest learning I've had in all three of my near-death experiences is, first of all, that I am one lucky cookie to be alive. And especially after the ventilator and COVID one, I am breathing. I was not able to breathe and almost died. That virus was awful. And so there's nothing but almost spiritual gratitude. I'm alive and I'm breathing. And therefore, most of us who've been out in the light have left human ego behind. It's not that we don't have enough to be functional here, you know, no shame about the ego that we each have, but it doesn't drive. So what I want to do is not egotistically tell my story so that you're amazed by my story. I want to share the amazing experience I had in all three times in a way that I hope is useful to you in your own path, either along with the experiences you yourself have had, or if you haven't, to help your curiosity about what it's like, where we go, where do we come from, where do we go, all of those things. And then because we have 2 hours instead of 30 minutes, I want you all to either ask me questions and or share your own experiences once we open it up, so that we have a nice, more intimate circle here. And that's the gift of Zoom, because I don't have to be in the same room as you, even though that would be even better. In fact, I'll start with the trivial. I know I was very close to where most of you are in Northern Virginia. Now, my brother-in-law still lives in the house that he and my wife grew up in Washington, D.C., in Georgetown. And he and his wife and kids have now, just in the last year, bought an old farmhouse in Northern Virginia. I wish I could remember. One of you has to tell me the main road that goes out from DC and past a little town that has a famous bakery in it. I can't remember. But anyway, I've been there at this farmhouse, and so I'm going to pretend that I'm there with you now.
Do you know in which direction? Was it towards Leesburg, perhaps?
Yeah. You know what? Watch this thing. And Johanna, what's the name of the town where your brother's farmhouse is? Marshall. Do any of you know where Marshall is? No.
Sorry.
What's that highway out there that goes by it? Okay, never mind.
That goes down from Dallas, and I don't know.
Okay, anyway.
Well, we're in Northern Virginia. I don't know if that makes a difference.
Yeah, it does. That means you're more north. I understand.
We're more like the outskirts of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Metro in.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Anyway, I've been there, and I lived in D.C. for 2 years after college and worked in the government there, and so I even know that. All right, so after I lived in DC, I grew up in Minnesota. I went to Amherst College in New England. I worked in DC for 2 years, between 70 and 72, right before we discovered Watergate. I left because of the lack of ethics, in government, ethics being one of my highest priorities. And it can happen on the left and the right, so I'm not making a political statement, I'm making an ethical statement, okay? And I then went back up to the Boston area, and helped start a little startup, and then I worked in public television in Boston. And then I fell in love with a high school friend from Minnesota, and she was in law school in San Francisco. So I could easily move from the public TV station in Boston to the one in San Francisco, and that's what I did. I drove across the entire country in a U-Haul truck because I was in love, and I have never left San Francisco since then in August of 1976, which is 42 years now almost. And right after I was there to transition into my first NDE, I had been feeling for all those developmental years of my 20s, those 8 years, let's say from 20 to 28. Well, I've worked in government now. I once wanted to get into government and be a senator. I worked in a startup. I like entrepreneurialism. I worked in public television. I love the ethics and the honesty of PBS and what they do. And I raised corporate underwriting grants. You know, this program, Symphony, is brought to you by Raytheon. I raised that money and things like that. But in everything I was doing, even though they sound unrelated, I was using this personality that likes interacting with people. And I like finding a partner that for whom whatever I'm conveying is mutual. I don't try to sell anything that isn't what you're wanting. I try to say, how do we connect in a way that is really good for both of us? So that's what I discovered is sort of like, you know, what color is your parachute? All these strangely different things had one thing in common: me connecting with people, looking for a mutual connection. And as I say stunningly to people, I mean, from the boardroom to the bedroom, and from the government to the grocery store, and it doesn't matter. Every relationship is a relationship, and we're trying to connect. Okay, so that relates to all the things I'm going to share with you that I've learned, given that was my most natural inclination from the beginning. So, but right after I got there, I didn't really know. I'd worked in government, nonprofit, and a corporation, and a small corporation, and I'd raised money from big corporations. And I grew up with privilege in Minnesota as a straight white male, 14 generations since the Mayflower, and I felt like there almost was nothing I wasn't able to do, but I still felt uncertain about who I really am and what I'm here for. What's your purpose, you know? And so what I'm going to share with you now was about that, because I was driving my girlfriend's old Berkeley Volvo, you'll see in a moment. And you know what? I just realized, Mike, we forgot the cartoon, so let's save it for last. Okay, the cartoon will be last. It doesn't matter, first or last. And now put up the picture of the car in which I had this accident. And I was driving here in Berkeley, and I was in that old gray, I call it a Berkeley Volvo. They don't exist anywhere else anymore. And that pickup truck drove past that stop sign, and we had an accident at 90 degrees. I hit his right rear fender. He didn't hit me. And I left my body, and you can get rid of the photo now. I actually left my body and had the experience, not like other NDEs I've heard, where I was over the accident watching it, or over the surgery watching it, or visiting people from prior lives, or having any of those things that weren't as as far. Instead, my experience was I was called high speed through what we call the tunnel, all the way into absolutely pure light, which the words are never enough. But my experience was I was at the source of all light, all energy, all consciousness, all love. Whew. And it was amazing. And it wasn't an egotistical way of like, oh, now I know everything. No, it was like I, at the soul level, was experiencing this is the source from which we all come. and to which we all go. So either my imagination, none of this is scientific, right? What I experienced to be true was just my experience. My experience was, if that's where our souls come from, and if you really believe that maybe there's such a thing as prior lives, that's quite a stretch for a lot of us, whatever our religious upbringing is. Some people definitely believe that, and some don't. I can just tell you, my experience was I was at the source from which we all come. And we've had prior lives, these souls that we now are and have always been and always will be. And if you imagine it, a prior life, that means in a prior life, none of us was in this particular body in which we now live. Whew. That's pretty deep to take, isn't it? We were different gender, maybe, different color, skin, different language. Who knows? Who knows? So, given my upbringing, which is why I told it to you before, of this 14th generation privileged ethnocentrism, and from pure ignorance, therefore, came ethnocentrism and lack of ability to connect to anyone else very deeply, because they all had to do it for me in this continent. I mean, in other continents, look what's happening. You know, there's good and there's evil, and there are a lot of people who don't get it in every tribe, right? And there are some people who get it in any so-called tribe. So at this moment, up in this light, I realized, wow, we are all one at the source. And we are uniquely different, every one of us, with our DNA, the only DNA in the history of life on Earth. Yes, we may look whiter or less white, or male or female, and look what we've been learning about the spectrums of even pigment. You know, Norway is not the same as Italy, but we're called white. Kenya is not the same as South Africa, but they're called black, even though the only ones that are black are at the equator, right? Where you go further north or south, you lose melanin. So I learned all that just with my experience. And as if that wasn't enough, I then heard a voice. Now, not everybody who has an NDE hears a voice. And maybe some of you hear a voice when you're lying in bed and it's your great grandmother. Or, you know, people have all kinds of out-of-body experiences, and they're all part of the same truth, that mind, body, and spirit are three different words for a reason. And our spirituality and our soul are separate from our body and our mind, okay? So where's memory? How can I possibly have a perfectly clear memory of where I was up in the light, if we thought memory was only in the brain, and the brain was in the body, and the body was in that total automobile? Oh, we can't answer that yet. So science only allows us to answer what we can prove to be true. And everything else you can call faith or spirituality or whatever you want to call it. But when I came back from this experience, even some people asked me, golly, how were you raised? I was raised a Christian Episcopalian. Well, are you more Christian now or less? I said, and I went, oh my God. All I can tell you is that I'm both. I'm 100% more spiritual, because I now know where we come from, and that we all do, and that we can leave, and I know where we go. And I know, looking at each of us, that we all have souls and we all have spirit. And I can, if I'm right with you, I can look in your eyes and see you and see how open and spiritual you are within 15 seconds, and how you smile, and how, if we can see that we trust each other, the energy gets enhanced and we feel really safe. And if either I'm being a jerk or you're being a jerk, we know how to have survival skills and back up and go, oh, I can't be too intimate yet with this person, baby. You know, we all know that. But I learned all of that in the light. We're all one and uniquely different. And I learned that before I heard this voice. And this voice, I don't know what else to call except the word you've heard before called a conversation with God. You know, there's this guy who wrote this, who was homeless on the streets, and he had his experience, and he started describing it, and he started writing about it, and lo and behold, he's written, I think, 4 of these books now. But anyway, I heard a voice. So the next interesting thing is the voice we hear is, of course, whatever voice we need to hear in whatever language, in whatever gender, whatever we call gender. Look at what we're learning now about the spectrum of even gender. We all grew up thinking you're all 100% this or that, and now we're learning that's not exactly true. Wow. But guess what? This is not only a challenge because we like how we identify ourselves, it's also a great relief when we can really get that all that we can possibly be is exactly who we are at the soul level and in this DNA and these life experiences. And if we try to be what the common denominator needs us to be, except going through green lights, staying in the right lane and not hitting and stealing, those are the only things we have to do to be safe with one another. Otherwise, we're finally learning the greatest gift we can give ourselves and everyone else is to be exactly who we are. Just the way we are, not the common denominator only. Yes, we're all human. We have lots in common. In that spectrum between we're all one and we're uniquely different, there are many, many ways in which each of the 12 of us, have some things in common. We're all now hearing or speaking the same language. We all think by looking at our photos, we're either male or female. We have different amounts of melanin, you know, and Mike has a little more, but only a little bit more. When I get really tan, I can be almost that handsome, you know. But we have different hair, we have eyes differences, but you know, doesn't it feel great to know we're all one in the ways we are, and we're uniquely ourselves in the way we're just us? And if you go around the whole circle and say, do you see any other body you would rather be in for the rest of your life? Every one of us goes, no, no, no. I know this one isn't perfect, but you know, I'll stick with it. That's a lot of consciousness that I got up in the light. And this voice then said to me, but it'll make more sense to you now, not only for what I've shared about me, but in your own life, like trying to figure out what's our life purpose. This voice said, Lewis, you are brought here to have this conversation and to be sent back because you are not doing your work. And remember, I told you I wasn't sure what I wanted to be now when I grow up. In a way, that's normal in mid-20s, especially male. But I said, well, good. What is my work? Thinking I can just be told I'm here where all knowledge is, and where I'm having this voice of all knowledge. You can call it what you will. You can call it God. You can call it source. You can call it your own imagination. It doesn't matter. This voice of total consciousness said to me, well, what is it that keeps you from being, not doing? Remember, it's actually related here that the way I was raised, I could do whatever I want. I don't say that with arrogance. I say that with quite humility now that I understand, you know. But what is it that keeps you from being all you're capable of being? I didn't know. I thought doing everything I wanted to do was enough. So I had to go very deeply, and it was only by going very deeply that I came up with what you've already heard me say, which is, well, my parents did raise me saying we are all one under God. That felt good. So I've never been a jerk in my ethnocentric ignorance, but they also said, but here, you're special. And they didn't really mean that with arrogance. They meant it with noblesse oblige. You've been given so much free privilege that you have to give back. So their intention was right, and yet the energy was a little like you're better than everyone else. And I didn't like that. All my life growing up, I thought, wait a minute, if we're all one under God, I need to be able to see how equal we all are and we're all one. But the way I was raised, where everybody looked like me and we were all in private schools and then went to private colleges. And, it's like, it wasn't until I got to college when I discovered, oh my God, this gay Jewish guy in New York City is twice as bright as I am. He's here. He's I can learn a lot from him. And this black woman and this whatever. Now, this was Amherst College in New England. So back in 1966 to 70, I admit that 90% of us looked like me then. But I learned even from each of us, because there's enough diversity in just each of the 12 of us to have a lot to learn from the other 11. And I started to get that in college before this near-death experience, remember, but I started to get it. But after the near-death experience, when I said, I don't know, but it has something to do with, I don't know how to relate to anybody different than me that's not in the same tribe. And the answer was, that's your work. And I was sent back down immediately, high speed through the same tunnel. And I wasn't told what's going to happen. And what I got, at least conceptually, was, oh, you mean whatever our weakness is the opportunity we have to do that work? The other ways we've all been very successful, not just survived, but been our natural selves, or we do those pretty well, don't we? But if we can each ask, what really keeps me from being all I'm capable of being? We each have different answers, but that's the key. And that weakness, so-called, is actually a huge learning opportunity. And think what we could each learn from one another, because one of you is an expert at that, and one of you doesn't know to do what I know how to do, or whatever. So I really got, wow, my life's work is to focus on my ethnocentric ignorance and try to learn from all the rest of you who know how to cross bridges better than I did, how to do it, whatever the difference, age, race, gender, orientation, culture, language, it didn't matter. So I told my global wife about this experience, who speaks 3 languages and grew up all over the world. And she said, you didn't know that? And she said, we are going to start the very first diversity in training in the US, this was 1983, to teach other straight white men who don't get it how to get it. And you're it, Lewis. And there's no shame, no blame about whiteness or men or anything. It's just, it takes one to know one, right? So I can only do my work. I can't teach anything that I haven't learned myself. And I've never been arrogant enough to try to teach any of you. I'm teaching myself. And if I meet somebody else who's got some things in common, we can work on that together. But that became my work. And I've been doing it for 40 plus years, since 1983, 40 years. So if you look at my website, Griggs.com, you'll see we created 23 award-winning videos. We created workshops on valuing diversity. We've published 2 books, one going international culture differences, one valuing diversity here in the US. We created the National Diversity Conference, which I sold to SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. All of it was using the skills that I was given in my privilege to do the spiritual work that I hadn't done beyond our oneness, and that is the cross-cultural bridging, code switching, you call it whatever you wish. That's what I had to learn how to do and teach others how to do. And it's never stopped. And that all came from a white light experience, and where I was asked, what keeps you from being all you're capable of being? And the learnings started immediately. This may sound strange, but since I've already told you, I already was able to do whatever I wanted to do. The first learning I had when I got back into this body, with no damage, by the way, the car was totaled, but I walked out of it and told the ambulance, there's no problem. That was interesting. And since I hadn't been told how my life was going to change to do this work, I started discovering immediately something I had never discovered. And that is the doors that open without me, in your case, the doors that you've felt open without you doing the one to open them. That's very different than the doors you opened. So since I grew up opening whatever door I wanted, and now I felt this door just opened and I don't have a clue what's on the other side of this. But if I enter without knowing and I just trust that there's a reason I'm being called here, there's going to be some learning there. And that learning is going to open me and broaden me further and raise my consciousness. So I now love more than anything what I don't know. Instead of hanging on with righteousness to what I do know with arrogance. Because when I'm talking, even now, I can only say to you really what I already know. But if I just sat back and listened to all 11 of you one at a time, you'd each teach me something I don't know. So then I had to go out and teach. In the workplace, I focused on the workplace because in the workplace with a common goal, whatever small the team is, you have some common goal. Well, I learned that it's easier to accomplish that common goal instead of all of us looking exactly the same and having all the same beliefs. We do have that common goal. And then we have other things in common, whatever it is, language or whatever. But the differences we bring to that team or that partnership, as I say again, from the boardroom to the bedroom, from the boardroom to the grocery store, to your boss, to your employees, to your partner, to your children, to your friends. Everything we bring to every relationship is a mixture of what we have in common as a goal in that relationship and as a purpose, and the differences with which we co-create success at having that goal become reality because of our differences and our different perspectives. Like, duh. Why didn't I know that? So I've had to fight all this work that we all be the same. No, and you're perfect now, Ugh. Instead, I like discovering what I don't know with you, because you know a lot that I don't know. So that's the whole first near-death experience, and it's gone on for 40 years. But when I do this, there are some groups that prefer to hear all three and then have questions, and some groups prefer to have a question or two about each one because they're a little different. So either, Angie, you decide which you want because you're in charge, or do we ask them which they want?
Well, what I would say is if you have any questions, please write them in the chat or lift your hand. I do actually have a couple of questions. I don't think it's a bad idea to go one by one.
Okay.
There's a lot to take in, and sometimes
Yeah.
we get our original questions.
Oh, yeah.
The first one you had this out-of-body experience. You went to the light. Did the ambulance come at a time to try to resuscitate you? Did this all happen before the ambulance arrived?
Thank you. Yeah, great question. No, this one, I was just flown. My soul left my body, went through the tunnel, high speed, into the light. There was nothing wrong with my body, with me, my brain, anything back in there. I was just in pure light and spirit. And when I was sent back down, I got back into this body. I remember getting back in, like you put on those tight surgical gloves, not the loose blue ones that we don't wear in the sink, or we should, but these really tight ones. It was like getting back into the body like that until I can't do that without my finger. With this white light. And I was sitting there in this total automobile, and I felt like there's no problem. And that's why I just got out. So they took me to the hospital to make sure nothing was wrong, but nothing was wrong. And everybody thought that was very strange. I had hit my head on the windshield, and I hit my shoulder on those little things. Those of us who are old enough remember those little triangle things that sometimes they're not there anymore. A little vent window. Anyway, and so, yeah, I felt that, but there's not damage. And I was fine. Amazing. Other,
So you said something intriguing about, whatever, this is my paraphrasing, whatever our weakness is where we need to do our work.
absolutely. It's a
That's
huge opportunity.
Interesting.
Very interesting. It really, thank you. That's the biggest learning of all. What is it, if anything, that keeps you from being, not doing, all you're capable of being in your natural, authentic, pure self? And instead of focusing accurately on the things externally that keep you from being or doing, that's great work. But this question was, what within you? Because we can only work on ourselves. We can't fix other people that we think are the cause of everything wrong. What is it that keeps each of us from being all we are capable of being? And we all know what it feels like when we're being close to that and we're in our flow, and when we're not and we feel insecure or not enough or whatever. But that's the question. And that was the biggest learning. And so when I say weakness, I don't even mean it in a judgment. I mean, whatever we're ignorant of or weak or don't do as well, because we all had survival skills. I call it that. We all had, in each family, we survived differently than our siblings, and we're different. We have different DNA and different, all kinds of things. So we used the things that we have that are different to be the success that we've been. And that's great. And not but, and we therefore didn't work on some of the other things that now we admit we might as well work on this that we don't yet, that we aren't masters of. And that so-called weakness is the opportunity to become a strength. In other words, to be blunt, how on earth could this 14 generation straight white Anglo yuppie privileged wasp become one of the first leaders of the diversity training in the United States? Because he's the problem. And every time I go to be a speaker at a diversity conference, there's almost no straight white men there. They didn't choose to come. And everybody else, as you can imagine, just being yourself or just being female or just having more melanin or being trilingual, whatever it is about you that's different than this stereotype, you can imagine what it felt like for you if you're in the audience and I walk up to talk about diversity training. I could feel the energy in the entire audience, whether it was 5 or 50 or 500 or 1,000, go, oh my God, who invited this guy? Seriously. And I learned very quickly, I deserved that because of your own life experiences that were beyond mine. And I know I'm not an expert at anything except how to recover from my own ignorance and ethnocentrism and my own self-interest so that I can see and value you.
Very good. I would invite everybody, if they want to share whatever they feel their weaknesses and how that maybe have, whatever they believe is holding them back and how maybe that's a way to, where their work lies, as it were. I would definitely invite you to share that with us. While we're waiting for those, I would like to say that I feel in my own life that one of the things that held me back from a very early age was my upbringing, my relationship with my father, for example. That seemed to sort of get in the way of optimal development, if you will, and self-esteem, self-confidence, etc. And interestingly enough, I do feel I became interested. I am a psychologist, and now I feel that the source is guiding me to work with couples because that's an area that's desperately needed. But what I'm saying is, I feel that source has guided me to do more of this work, which comes from some of my own weaknesses.
Absolutely. And now it's your straight, you're doing your own work professionally. You're the one who had to do psychiatric work right in your family. How do I get along with this dad? How do that's your work. Isn't that great?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. So we have a question here from Bruce. How does your light experience affect you when you're sharing your understanding about diversity with people who may think you're still coming from your prior straight white male privileged perspective, as you called it? Maybe a similar question, how they trust what you're saying. How do they trust what you're saying?
That's fantastic. So I can tell you, since everybody's doing their own work or not, I'll tell you a couple answers. One, my particular, what I call tribe of straight white male, wonderful friends, well educated, they're my best friends, or I play tennis with them, or whatever I do in my, none of them really gets as deeply as I do this work that I do. So the best connections I actually have, except for my wife that I love. I mean, to me, living and breathing is number one, and love is number two for both my partner and her children and my children. And number three is the work I do. But in the work I do outside of myself and my family, the best so-called intimacy, but just call it spiritual connection. That's all I mean. Safe, really safe oneness with someone else comes outside my tribe with anybody in a diverse group who isn't one of me, one of my type, who happens to also get that that's the goal. And that's the gift we bring one another. So I can meet somebody, and I'm telling you, what I finally learned after all these years was one sentence that I want you to remember. And that is, wow, in spite of all of our differences, and all of our knowledge, which is better than ignorance, or all of our ignorance about the other, they just look strange, like from another planet. Even with someone like that, it only takes about 15 to 30 seconds to feel. Workplace executives don't like that word. The energy, and now they really wonder what I'm smoking. To feel the energy either get enhanced, like I said before, or depleted. That is the consciousness, and I love the word noticing, that the minute we meet anybody, we are each capable of noticing how it feels. Just like you and your father, just like each of you and your mother and your father. That's where we start. And then our siblings, and then our friends, and eventually our lovers, and then our, you know. And if we can, in those first 30 seconds, feel the energy either get enhanced or depleted, as I already said before, I want you to feel it again. For the minute we're enhanced, look what we do. We go, God, we don't talk this way, but we go, I really see you. I really feel good. And I even feel seen and trusted at the core, in spite of the way I look or the way I'm dressed or whatever. And when we have that, great things start to happen. So that's my answer, is that every time I went to look for somebody in an organization to help me make this video or be part of this workshop, they were either one of those where I could feel them going, oh my God, all right, I know how to be polite, but whew, this guy is the problem. That person was feeling. Or I would have this connection to tell them what I'm trying to do, and they would go, it's as if they said, but they didn't. They felt it. Oh my God. Yeah, he's still a yuppie wasp doing the work he has to do. I see that, but he's doing it. And I see you, Lewis, and I see what you're trying to do, and I want to do it with you. That's what I'm trying to do here, and they aren't getting it. So these wonderful connections came across difference. And it's like, wow. Once again, I started to notice whenever there's something that I don't understand and that door is open, enter. Because we all know how to have a survival skill, which is if it feels depleting, close it. Protect yourself. Stay back. And if it feels safe, open and learn together.
We have some questions, but were you always so much of a feeler, or did that come from the NDE?
What was the word? Was I always such a feeler?
Yes. I mean, allow feelings, because it's not very masculine, is it? I mean, in this time and space, it's very much a feminine construct, and guys tend to shirk from it. They tend to sort of want to recoil.
Well, language is language. So you're correct. The way most of us are raised, we are raised usually that if you have those genitals, you're supposed to be a tough guy and don't cry and don't have feelings and show what you can do. That's not only in a white culture, that's pretty male around this earth. You know, little differences. And if you got the other genitals, oh God, you are tender and you're supposed to be sweet and gentle. And so that's a lot of that is socialized. And I can't tell you where to draw a line. And there are some gender differences that are stereotypical. Now, if you take normal shaped curves of males tend to be like this and females tend to be like that, notice those curves overlap. Yes, the bipolar mother of my kids who took our bipolar daughter, off her breast in 6 weeks and said, here, you take her, is very different than my current wife that breastfed, for 2 years, 3 years at the dinner table. And yes, after I received this daughter, I am the one who loves my children and her children. And if we met your children the minute I see them, how did I learn that? We call it more feminine. I don't like to necessarily call it that. I know it's a language, we can use it. I love the children the way my father loved me. And I learned how my mother loved me. But I love in a wonderfully male way that's 100% safe and 0% sexually interested in any of you or your daughter or my daughter. And I hug my son like I hug my daughter. It doesn't feel feminine to me. It just feels like human.
Absolutely. So we have a question here from Ruta. What gives you confidence that you've changed minds? Lots of people think there are inherent differences that justify inequality. In the workplace, people have to pretend that they believe in inequality, that they believe in equality, but they don't act as if they do. Do you see a difference in the air these days? I worked in the diversity bits.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I want to answer in 2 ways. In 40 years, there's huge progress. And in each of my little workshops, if it's little or wherever, whether it's one-on-one coaching or facilitating or speaking at a big group, I try to have everybody be able to leave, including here in this group, with something new that they didn't have before. That's not me teaching what I learned in my head. I'm trying to be with you and share what I've learned in ways that you can take 10 or 20% and leave the rest. But as long as you get something that helps you be your fuller self and having learned something new, that's fantastic. So yes, there's been huge progress. And oh my God, look at what we've experienced in this country, not to mention Ukraine and Syria and all over this earth and in Africa, right? The damage that males around this earth are causing when they get out of control with male control, pun intended. But in this country, look what we've learned when videos showed the knee on the neck of George and all of the others. It's like, oh my God, that's so different than reading a little paragraph in the newspaper and not knowing what really happened. So for me to have noticed not only the deeper part of that, but the subtle part of that, which is, oh my God, I grew up in Minneapolis and St. Paul with total privilege with a family that helped create the state and is known all over. And guess what? When I drove from home on the hill to the private school to the country club and around, I know how to get around Minneapolis and then go skiing and then go. I have no idea where that part of town is where George was killed. That is sad. That is ethnocentric arrogance and privilege and all the rest without even, I didn't even know it. It just was. It's just, they were there and I was, So you asked a lot of good questions, but yes, there's difference, and how I connect and hope people change is the way I just said. And with all of that progress, look at how far we still have to go given what we've experienced in the last couple of years. So now I'm reading books. I'm reading so many books by Black men and women and others, white, and I'm telling you, I want to tell you, just this is the only sort of diversity thing I want to share. Out of all the 20 books I've read since I could breathe again after the COVID ventilator and life that I'm so lucky to have, I want to tell you the 3 best so that you can choose either the softest, gentlest, most spiritual one. It's called what color is your soul? And it's a black woman in one of the Carolinas. And through it, you just get, my God, we're all just drops in the ocean. And what are you wasting time worrying about how much melanin you have? It's just wonderful, and it's totally spiritual and really opening, if that is appealing. And then and that was one of the first ones I read. Recently, the second to the third one that I read, the second to the last, is the most recent, is 2 books ago. Letters to My White Male Friends, written by a guy, Dax. He grew up in DC, and I grew up I spent 2 years in DC, so you'll all know what I mean when I say he grew up in NE, in Northeast, where everyone was black. Letters to My White Male Friends. And his family decided to have him educated over in Northwest in Georgetown, or right above, whatever, in private school over there. And from that experience, he learned how to be absolute friends with people like me. And he also learned what people like me had no clue of. And he said, these are letters to you, my white male friends. So without shame or blame, he says things that in the introduction made me go, oh my God, I have to know this guy. I put the book down and I called him. And we set up a time, and we had a 30-minute time, and it went to 90 minutes, and we were both just like hugging with such gratitude with this amount of consciousness and the gift that he brought to me as a white male. All right. And after that, the one I'm now 2/3 through is just stunningly challenging. It is called Caste. And it's by a black woman. And oh my God. Every little paragraph that she's describing is so accurate about the way I was raised, that talked about everything about the way my family, the way we loved our cleaning lady, who either was white but Polish and a new immigrant or something like that, or the black who helped this, or the Latina wonderful love, sort of like that movie we saw about the white woman in the South who loved her black driver and all that, in what she called love. And so, in other words, without shame, she builds such consciousness about the impact of caste on her and on everybody below whatever you think is caste. So, for instance, my family, who was very, very proud that the original entrepreneur who helped create all the wealth that is now all gone, by the way, but it took 6 generations to use it up. Okay. Whereas some families are still in trust funds. I do not have one. I have nothing. It's all gone. But I grew up under it. And then they were so proud that this entrepreneur was also a colonel in the Civil War, and that we've always been in the North and never believed in slavery. We believe we're all one, even though you, Lewis, are much better and we are much better. But guess what? They never, ever once mentioned. Whether I'm driving in Lake Minnehaha on a street or whatever, they never talked about what happened to all the Native Americans, and why my family believes that it owned 70% of the state of Minnesota. Hello. Whew. So, caste. Oh my God, she deserved the Pulitzer Prize.
And of course, implicit in caste, which is not really spoken about in the United States, but 3 of us on this call are from the United Kingdom, which is a caste-ridden system. It's getting much better with time, but still, it's a very insidious system because it keeps the haves having and the haves not without.
Precisely.
Very, very subtle. It's extremely subtle. It's a very interesting instrument.
It's so subtle. My family never used the word caste. In North America, we talk about class, and you're right. She wrote about 3 castes, perfect castes in this world: India, UK, and Nazi Germany. But I'm telling you, I'm all English blood. I'm all English blood in 14 generations. Can you imagine the righteousness to make sure you're sleeping not with a white, but an Anglo for 14 generations? Whoa, that's caste.
Well, let's move on.
Okay.
Questions, but I'm going to hold on to Eva's question because I want to get to the
All
second
right.
NDE.
So as if that wasn't enough, here I am for, let's say, for 20 of the last 40 years, highly successful with a huge company of 25 full-time employees, 50 part-time when we produced new videos and seminars and workshops. Everything was totally working wonderfully. And with driven by spirit. Okay, so I went from books called and videos called Going International to Valuing Diversity to Valuing Relationship to Human Energy at Work. When I would say things next to the executives at Chevron who helped pay for all this, and Hewlett Packard and Exxon, and at Chevron, I'll never forget the day. This is the only one I get to brag about because I didn't get paid for this. But you can see the evidence of it now, 12 years later, whenever it was, 20 almost now. I said to them, I want you to stop thinking of your greatest resource as dead dinosaurs. You're already past that, right? You know that that's mostly what you're doing now, but you're doing other forms of energy. But you think of your greatest resources as minerals and things from the earth, or money, financial resources. I want you to really get that your human resources are the greatest asset you have because of their diversity and their humanness, their oneness and their differences. And I want you to start imagining that you can market yourself as a human energy company. Have any of you seen a documentary or a show on PBS or any other movie or something where you see a commercial from Chevron? I know that's not the main standard gasoline you have in the DC, Virginia area, but nevertheless, they say Chevron, a human energy company, and they show all this diversity. And I go, yes. But when I said it, they were thinking, oh God, there goes Lewis again. You know, saying that one sentence about you can feel the energy. And then I wanted to do films called Human Spirit at Work. And they all said, all the companies who helped me do this work said, no, that's going too far, Lewis. I wanted to do it. But the reason I'm saying all that is that I was using the skills with which I was raised and educated and given in DNA to apply those skills, those doing skills, toward the being of the spiritual connection that I was trying to make with everybody, but I couldn't talk that way, which is why I went to get an MBA at Stanford so I could learn the language of people who look like me so that they would trust me. But I actually don't care about corporate profit maximization on a quarterly basis. I care about human potential and all of us being all we're capable of being. And I had to learn that language so they would trust me. So the reason I'm saying all that, which is an answer to what I'm getting to, is that suddenly show the picture now of the white water on my bipolar daughter's graduation at age 15 from a recovery school because she's bipolar and needed special attention. This was, of course, in the first one was March 11, 77. This one was Father's Day, June 15th, 97. We went down the river on a raft just like this, although this one wasn't that day. This one was when we went back 20 years later. So there I am in the front in the sunglasses. On my right shoulder is my current and finally perfect, wonderful, best friend ever wife. And behind my left shoulder is my bipolar daughter who had just graduated from the school in Montana. And on the far right is my son. And my daughter is now going to be 40 and my son is now going to be 35, but they were 15 and 10. And the other three men there are guides that were, one of them was in our raft 22 years ago now, in 97, geez, 25 years ago. And two of them were in a different raft behind us because nobody was allowed, and now you can get rid of the photo, nobody was allowed to go down the river then. Why? because there was too much high and fast water. Why? From so much rain and prior snowmelt in Glacier Park, Montana on Father's Day, June 15th. And I said, well, why can't we go down? And they said, because there's legal limits. You can't go if it's beyond this point of speed and height, etc. And I said, are we there? And they said, we're right there. And I said, you mean the rule is you can't go beyond it? But we can go there legally now today? So the reason I'm saying this is now I want us each to understand, like I had to learn, how do some of us ever cause some of our own problems? I've caused a lot of my problems. I'm even willing to say maybe all three of these near-death experiences by going right to the edge. I think I'm so proud that I love going to the edge, so I know where it is and I don't go over it. But if I really was standing right on the edge and then the wind blew me over, what might have been smarter to stand 5 feet back. But I said to them, then let's go. And they said, okay, if you sign here that we aren't liable for anything. And so we went down the river and the waters were very fast. I've done a lot of whitewater, but maybe none of you have, some of you have, whatever. The water was fast, but it was very high. So let's say there were fewer number 5s, little cliffs, and mostly there wasn't steep stuff, but it was so fast and high and a little bit of white that it was eating the root cakes off of the edges of the river. And there was a lot of wood in the river. I didn't care. A rubber raft can touch wood. The arrogance that comes from privilege. Oh. Anyway, thinking I could do what I want. There we were going down the raft looking that happy as that photo down the river in the raft. And a 100-foot tall cottonwood tree fell off the edge of the river and landed on my head and my son's head. My 10-year-old son and I. My daughter missed it. My skull was so fractured and so broken open with so much pus and blood, and the tree was on top of my head on the edge of the raft, and the raft was stuck in the water because the roots of the tree were still on the ground like that, holding the raft. The water was going past us. I was under the tree, between the tree and the rubber raft, and my 10-year-old son was upside down, drowned in the bottom of the raft with fractured skull also. And my daughter was told, oh my God, your father's dead, but if you hold, we knocked the water out of your son's lungs. If you can keep him alive, maybe by talking to him and trying to keep his eyes open before a helicopter arrives to take him to the hospital. He's only got 2 hours to live. And she wrote this amazing 10-page thing later, one paragraph of which said, I said this earlier, my father's dead. My brother's dying in my arms. And when I tell my mother, she's going to kill herself. Now what do I do? You kill yourself. I don't even understand, but she is so bipolar and so is her mother that they spend their life feeling they're not good enough and they're brilliantly creative and they wonder why they're alive. My greatest teacher, I'm not judging, I'm saying, my God, I love them both still. The mother, my kids, and my daughter. Anyway, that was the accident that happened. It was so severe that it was on local television and newspapers in Montana. And it was even in San Francisco, where I was so well known. It was on the local news and in the newspaper that this guy, Lewis Griggs, had this amazing accident. And they did find that there was life in me, sort of, just like they found life in my son. And when the helicopter came, it had to take him because he only had 2 hours to live. I had 4 hours to live, they said. My lungs and my heart were okay, but the brain was destroyed. And so he came out of a coma in 2 days, and I had to put him in a special private school, and I had the ability to put him in a special private school to help him get special education, and he ended up getting an 800 on his math SATs, and he's now an engineer at GoPro, and he's fine. My daughter is still bipolar, and all her life has been through constant things that I've helped her save her life, and I love her, and she's brilliant and wonderful. And my greatest teacher. So when they brought me back to life, I was in a coma for 8 days. And when I came out, I had no idea who I was or who those people were in my room. My mother, my father, my wife, the mother of my kids. And I was talking gobbledygook. Now picture this. If the left frontal lobe and all those personality skills from privilege are what were used to make this diversity training so successful for 20 years at the spiritual level where I did my own work, what was the learning about removing the left frontal lobe with brain injury so serious that I couldn't read, write, walk, or talk and didn't know who I was or who you were? All I can say and have you feel in your own life is, what was the purpose of that crisis that happened in your life? To your mother, father, you, your brother, sister, child, lover, physical, mental. And you will agree with me that you're not glad the accident happened, but the greatest learnings in our life came from those crises. And then you have to repeat, that doesn't mean you're glad it happened, but think about it. Isn't it true there was some amazing learning that came from that crisis? Yes. So what was this one about now that I'd already had the first one and going, wow, this door's open. What can I learn here? Well, here I am taken to the hospital, flown back to San Francisco and told that I had such serious left frontal lobe brain injury that it was going to take a while to work on it. It took 3 years. Every day being taken to the hospital to do left frontal lobe brain injury treatment, whether it was verbal, at other parts of intellect. You know, I remember looking at pictures and they were saying, what is this? And that one, I don't remember what it's called, but I've seen it in Africa. It has this long neck. I've seen that one. This other one, I don't know. I don't know. I remember every phase of relearning the intelligence and the multitasking we all have. With nothing but gratitude. How could I have nothing but gratitude? Because so much was taken away that I only had one thing to be grateful of. I was alive. And the next greatest learning came the very first week when I was trying to walk on those horizontal bars and I couldn't make my legs move. And I experienced, differently than in the light, all the oneness that we are. I experienced, to use a metaphor now, wherever you grew up, take the tornado or the hurricane, and your knowledge that in the center is 100% stillness, 0% energy, with 100-mile-an-hour winds around. Just take that metaphor and imagine in yourself now that you also are not able to walk, read, talk. You don't know who you are. And think of the whole body as the part of the tornado, the external of the center of the tornado, of the center of you, which is 100% light and love and energy and spirit. The same thing I discovered up in the light. That is the core of each of us through all 8 chakras. At the core, and all the light comes in from above and feeds this, our authentic, natural being. And all the rest of this stuff called the body, the personality, the life experiences, for better and for worse, the ability to make me and you whatever we are. So this guy who loves tennis and my golden retriever and my daughter and my son and my diversity training and my Volvo. Oh, does that matter? Not compared to this first one. I just am. And philosophers go, Get rid of the I, that's ego, just am. So now what am I? Buddhist? Jesus? I skipped the part about how, yes, I'm more spiritual and less religious because whatever religion we were brought up in, all to different degrees or not, decided what they thought the truth was for the things we don't know what the truth is. And some of them we believe that's it, and the other one's wrong. So I now feel that every religion is spiritually 100% wonderful at the core, and every religion, to different degrees, lesser or more, is a little bit presuming some truths that aren't necessarily provable. So did Jesus leave and come back? My experience now is, yeah, that guy Jesus did. Are all the other things the Catholics say that, when I, as Episcopalian, take the wine, it's just a symbol and they think it's really the blood of Christ? Well, people get to believe what they want to believe. Anyway, religion's religion, spirituality, spirituality. And I am at the core the same light and love and spiritual energy that each of you are, and we all are. And all this stuff that isn't working, I had to work on. And it got better. And it took 3 years before they said, you're done. Well, I wasn't done. None of us is done when you feel like we have the flu, or anger or something, or some sickness or something that keeps us from being our fullest selves. We feel like we're 70 or 80 or 90% our fullest selves, whatever. But so I did more after that. And now some things, sometimes I'm only 95% back and sometimes I'm 105% back. So are you, with the consciousness that you gained in that experience. Isn't it amazing? And it just keeps growing. We keep getting better and better. Oh my God, this sounds so out of space, but this is so critical to that earlier question. Are we making progress? I'll never forget when a Black friend of mine in diversity said, yeah, Lewis, we've made a lot of progress. Listen to this sentence. Before, the knife was a foot deep. Now it's only 6 inches deep. Just imagine if that's what you feel as a woman, as somebody not raised in privilege, as bicultural, bilingual, with more melanin, and you've had to deal, whether the British version or the American version or the African version or the Asian version, the Japanese version, the Chinese version. No judgment here, just the version of righteousness over. Yeah, the knife is not as deep as it used to be. And what if the knife is out? How's the scar tissue? Are you fully recovered from that mother, that father, that abuse? Or are you still dealing with it? Oh my God. So in a way, I did that on purpose, even though I forgot to say it then, because look how all of this is connected to our oneness, our individuality, our DNA, our life experiences, our choices, our ability to stay centered to our core authentic self. And yeah, keep doing work on the other stuff. We have to keep doing work on it. It never ends. It's constant growing and learning. It's great. All right. So that was the second near-death experience. And after that, I had to lay off all my company. Can you imagine? I came back to work after I was able to the next week. I mean, once they brought me and I sat there and I couldn't really speak very well and everything. It's like, oh my God, where's Lewis? I had to lay off 20 of the 25 employees, never produce anything new again. My wife went and had an affair with somebody who had tons of money because the guy who brought in all the money might never recover and might just stay retarded. And this was not the out-of-body experience, except what I just described to you, trying to walk. That was an out-of-body experience. But the accident in the river, I couldn't remember. So I did trauma therapy. After these 3 years, I did trauma therapy for another year or so, because that trauma we have, the gift of trauma, no matter what trauma you had in your life, no matter how serious or not serious, But even the most serious, the reason we have no memory of it is because there's a survival skill in our system, in our body, in our brain that goes, you can't handle even remembering that happened. That's how severe some trauma is. Whether it's a 6-year-old being raped or somebody having a knife or the physical abuse or mental abuse, trauma is trauma. And there's no point in arguing over who had the most or who had. We've all had little bits, at least, if not medium bits, if not a few serious ones. Wow, is there learning that needs to come out of during trauma? So you know what I did after a year? I said, thank you. You really helped me. I'm more back, but here I am wanting to go to my edge. I said, might I be capable of learning what experience I actually had in that trauma that I have no memory of? Can you is there memory in there? Or was it destroyed? Or was it saved from being able to be found? I don't know the answer. And there's a guy named Peter Levine, who's considered to be the best trauma expert in the country. He wrote a few books. And this trauma therapist talked to Peter, who was coming to San Francisco, which I live in Berkeley now, but for all these 40 years, I lived looking at that bridge behind Mike out of my house's window near the cliffs. Wonderful place to live and walk on the cliffs. And in San Francisco, he was having an annual conference of trauma therapy with all the trauma experts. I think there were maybe 250 of them. That's all, not 1,000, but something like that surrounding this. And I was taken to the stage and put on a chair next to Peter Levine. And he said, "Hi, Louis. What are you doing here? What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, I'm told that maybe you can help me get back to the moment the accident happened and see if there's any memory I can have. It can't be the kind of picture memory that we know is just visual. Ah, I remember that, where I was yesterday or last night at dinner or how you look. But there's an experiential memory of feeling, oh my God, I've had that experience of feeling like that when I had trauma." So at least he said, okay, close your eyes. And he hypnotized me mildly. And I can tell you, I felt 3 things shift. I could feel, and isn't it interesting, my eyes start to close because I'm going totally into just the memory of a feeling. I could feel I have just been crushed by this tree. And I am trying to be alive. Every cell in my body, mind, body, and spirit is trying to live instead of die. I had that feeling right on stage. I'm just trying to live. And then I don't know what he did, but it shifted. When I realized, all right, now this may sound strange, but picture this. I realized I'm alive. There's a tree on my head. My skull is fractured. There's blood all over. I'm very damaged, unlike in the car. I'm totally damaged. I barely hung on to life. But at this moment, I'm alive. Where's my son? I started to cry on stage. Where's Ian? My God, where's Ian? All of that came up on stage, just like what was happening inside me in the raft. And then somehow I had discovered my son was discovered, water was knocked out of him. He's alive and he's in my daughter's arms. And I stopped crying because at least he was alive. And I shifted into feeling like, okay, now what do I have to do to recover? I'm still under the tree. And from that moment on, all I experienced was what I can't do and how I'm trying to recover. And I didn't do it alone. I'm not talking about the power of positive thinking by Peel. Anyway, I'm not talking about discipline, personality. Yes, that's all a part of it. Great. Positive energy is very positive. And I'm telling you, the soul, the spirit, the mind, and the body even are constantly trying to live and survive on their own and together. I could feel that. That is an amazing feeling that I'm not doing this alone. Whew. So that was that near death experience called, oh, you can't call that an NDE, Lewis, because you didn't go through the tunnel and into the light. And you weren't watching from above. And I went, oh my God, the human righteousness with language we use. The first one shouldn't be called near death experience. The first one should have been called the experience of where we go when we die. This one was near death, actually, but that's just language. I just want you to know. So I had a spiritually transformative experience for sure, both in the river and in the recovery process for 3 years. What did I learn? Besides the deepest thing I just learned, my God, every time I meet any one of you and I suddenly see you're limping or you can't hear or you can't see or you have this scar, or you, it's like, wow, what happened to you? I'll tell you what happened to me. I have all these things. You can't see them. I seem like I'm back totally normal. I know what brain damage feels like. I know what disability feels like. Now have I learned not just to see white, black, Asian, Hispanic, straight, gay, old, young, male, female. Now I've learned to see spirit in any ability and disability. Wow. Learning is endless. All right, that's the second one. And it changed the next 20 years. I never went back to do the company. I couldn't. I was lucky that all those videos I made kept selling for several years. That helped me. Plus, I had disability insurance that helped me. And then I had to learn to coach instead of speak. I could speak to 1,000. You can tell now I have no problem talking. I can facilitate this group of 13 now if we had time to just facilitate, and maybe we will. Let's try. But even in person. But I didn't know how to coach. So when I went into coaching to figure out what am I going to do next, one-on-one coaching, once they met me, they said, Lewis, this is your first day of coaching, and what you're going to do today is shut up. We're going to put tape on your mouth. Today you are deaf, dumb, blind. You don't have a clue. You're a stoned surfer dude. You don't have a clue what's going on inside the client. All the answers are within the client. You can only ask questions and listen. And listen. Boy, did this white boy need to learn how to just listen and ask questions. Oh, it enables me to have finally not just equitable relationships where we're all one and uniquely different. It actually enabled me to not ever want another relationship where I have any power over or under anyone. We're just one together. We're equal. And I know what I know, and you know what you know. Let's share and love each other's differences. I guess I needed more learning. I guess they had to take away the entire left frontal lobe. How lucky I got most of it back. You know what else it's like? Listen to this. There was a black guy once in about my 15th year who said afterwards, when everyone was gone, Lewis, how do you get it so deeply? And I had never shared my white light experience yet in 15 years. It was too weird for people. So I looked at this guy and I thought, well, I don't know how spiritual you are. So, well, I'm a 60s kid, you know, and I started to look and he went, no. He cut me off immediately. This black guy said, Lewis, I have lots of 60s kid white friends and they're perfectly fine. They get what they get, but they don't get what you get. How did you get it? And I said, okay, I'll tell you. And I told him the story that I've told you. And you know what he said? This was as good as how deep is the knife, but this one was wonderfully, humorously, lovingly positive. You'll feel why. He said, "That's it. All we have to do is kill all the white guys and bring them all back." And he just gave me the biggest hug. Anyway, see, some things even out of context still make sense. So I keep learning. That was the second one. Any questions now before we go?
I would say let's go on with the third one and then we'll bring
Okay.
the questions in.
Okay. All right. The third one is, after all of that for 20 years, I finally do start doing coaching and facilitating. I still love it. And not as much, I mostly now have Social Security and sometimes a little income, and I'm married to the love of my life. Thank God. It's like, oh, finally. And I've learned what the other ones didn't, how the other ones didn't work, and just one sentence of teaching again for all of us. Every relationship we've been in that wasn't working perfectly, I hope we've all learned that instead of accurately noticing what is imperfect about the other, so accurate that all of us would agree, it never gets better. The impact, the ability to have the perfect relationship you're looking for, because you're still focusing on what's wrong with the other person's part of it. And only when we realize what was our contribution to it, not just arrogantly that we made the wrong choice and you're still the problem. No, 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 no. What is our percent of what didn't work? What keeps us from being all we're capable of being? And if we are so righteous that we think, all right, it's 90% you, everybody can prove that, fine. What's the 1%? What's the 5%? What's the 10% that you can own 100% responsibility for? And you can work on and you can fix. No one else can fix you. I can't fix you and you can't fix me. I can only fix me. And when we're able to look at what our part is, can you even feel or imagine if each of us did that now? Wow. We'd stop accurately judging the other. I mean, accurately, or noticing. And we'd start going, wow, this is my part. Or as you said earlier, what's the part that keeps me from being, or what's the part that keeps me from causing a problem in this relationship? Oh yeah, I did this before you did that and reacted to me. I guess I said this. Wow. And that might make you feel safe enough to go, well, thank you, Lewis. That's true. You did say that. But I'm even willing to admit that before you said that, that must have been triggered by what I did. The minute we're able to do that, we're safe. So anyway, all right. That's all the learning and all the stuff for 20 years, more good work, and finally met the love of my life. I'm still best friends with the mother of my kids, as is she. And she loves my two children, and I love her two children because we've each had a special child. That takes a lot of work and a lot of love. And when I see her special child, the first time I met him, I go, hi. And afterwards he went, are you for real? I feel like that was almost the greatest compliment I've ever made. He saw and felt that I saw him and his brilliant creative intelligence and his uniqueness, and none of me was judging what made him so special and difficult compared to the normal one. I learned that with my daughter. And when my daughter met my wife, something similar happened. After listening for an hour, my daughter looked at her and said, you love my father more than my mother ever did. You already love me better. I love my mother, but you are loving me in a way my mother didn't even know how to. Will you promise to love me the rest of my life too? Anyway, see, our learnings from our weaknesses become strengths and gifts. Okay, so then what happened? Well, I caught cancer, stage 3, developed it. This was in February of 2 years ago. Stage 3 cancer, and the surgeon wanted to, of course, remove it. And I said, I want to do everything except cancer. Yes, I will do everything that Western wants me to do. I'll do all the chemo and the radiation and all that. Ugh, but I'm also going to do all the non-medical, these foods. I hear that CBD, which is the non-THC part of marijuana, if you just take that chemical out, it kills cancer cells. Whereas guess what chemo does? It kills every cell in the entire body, which is why they do it. We don't know where else it's going to do. So we have to test your blood every 2 weeks to make sure your immune system isn't destroyed. Are you still able to handle any more poison? Oh, I've been through the whole experience for 6 months of chemo. And just when chemo was done, it was so awful. And I was ready to go do radiation for 5 weeks straight. I caught the COVID virus from the woman giving me chemo in the hospital in July of 20. And we now knew about it, but there certainly were no vaccines. The ones we were getting was killing 1,000 of us a day. I got it so badly that within a week I had trouble breathing, and within 2 weeks I could hardly breathe at all. And there were tons of other side effects, but finally I had to be tested after 1 week. But it took a week to get the answer then. And they wouldn't take you into the hospital until they had proof you had COVID, because everybody up in ICU has had COVID, and half of them were under ventilators, and they don't have the ability to take you unless you got it. Well, the bad news was it just got worse in that extra week before they could take me. And by the time I went into ER, my wife took me, I just couldn't even breathe, hardly. They rushed me from ER into ICU. And in ICU, they tried to force air into my lungs with different ways, and I couldn't breathe. And they rolled me over they said, if you can't breathe this, we're going to put you under the ventilator. And I said, no, you're not. My first cousin died in 2 weeks under the ventilator. And everybody died, 90% die. I'm not going under the ventilator. And they said, then you must be able to breathe this. And they can't. And then show the picture in the upper left. Don't look at the others yet. I'll tell you briefly. In the upper left, that's the way we all look when we're under the ventilator. There are tubes in our throat, in our nostrils, in our veins, in our neck, in our urethra, in our rectum, in our abdomen. There are tubes everywhere giving us food and chemicals, and air is going into a tube that's down in my throat. Not a narrow little tube, a tube like a hose, even though it's rubber, goes right down and forces air into the lungs, and the lungs aren't even handling it very well. I would have died. And the reason 90% die isn't because the ventilator causes it. It's because even the ventilator couldn't beat, and all the chemicals they give couldn't beat that virus. It destroys the lungs and the heart. So twice in those 10 days, my wife was told, I don't think we can keep him because his heart just failed. I'm not sure anyway. We're going to try. I don't want to say he's dead. But she, of course, felt I'm dying. And that's my wife, same one who was in the raft in the upper left on cell phone, because she was allowed on my cell phone that the nurse down below in the center was using, so my wife could be there and talk to me and sing to me and say, Lewis, get well. I love you. You got to live. And this woman was taking care of every inch of my body while the doctors did chemicals in my brain and everything. And after I survived, she came into the room where I was, and she started crying. So now I want you to feel this sentence having nothing to do with me. Imagine you're a nurse. Since March, you flew to New York to help there, and all you were doing was taking care of people who died and putting their bodies in trucks. And now you're on 12-hour shift, and every patient you're with covered completely. You're helping them live and taking care of their body, and they all die. And she walked into the room in just tears because she said, You're the first patient of mine in 6 months who has lived instead of died. Can I touch you now alive instead of the way you were? Can you smile at me? It was so great. So that's her. She's still a friend now. And then after 10 days under the ventilator, I lived. And I'll tell you in a minute about the near-death experience, but I want you to appreciate when I came back, look at me. My German wife said I look like Auschwitz. I lost 50 or 60 pounds. Actually, in 3 days in bed, I couldn't move my body. I couldn't get out of bed and go to the toilet. They had to lift my body to move me from left cheek to right cheek. So, and that is the scene where the first time ever in 3 months I was lifted out of bed by that nurse, because they get so worried when you lose so many muscles that you will never be able to recover. I had to be lifted out of the bed and try to have enough strength look at the legs and the arm, everything is gone. I couldn't even stand there on my own. She's holding me up, but my hands are on that walker. I couldn't walk. So I had to go through 3 months in the hospital before I could do that. And once I could do that, I went through another 3 months in a recovery place, trying to regain all the physical stuff. And the whole time I had to be breathing oxygen, like you can see in my nose there. I still couldn't breathe oxygen out of the air in the room. Have any of you heard how much oxygen there is in the air we're breathing in the room? Anybody know that answer? 21%, Bruce knows. That's all. But our lungs can't handle that air and everything else and get oxygen out of it. So for 6 months, I couldn't breathe air without having oxygen at least full time, and then 90% of the time, and then 60% of the time, and then 50% of the time, and then 20% of the time. And each of those times, I'm able to get just a tiny bit of oxygen or finally enough. And the first time they ever say, I think you're ready, first they force you and you go, no, I can't take that. And they say, you've got to learn. They try to push you to be able to do it. And if they do it perfectly, it feels great and you get a little better. And you can take that off my nose for 5 seconds. Nope, got to go back. But eventually when they're ready, it's like, and you go, oh, I can breathe. And after that, you have to measure, oops, I don't have it in this drawer. One of those things they put on your finger tells you how much oxygen you're getting and how your blood is. And they want your blood level, whatever it's measuring, to be at 90 or above, 95 or above, ideally. And when it drops to 90, you can feel it, and you're still needing more oxygen. You're not getting enough oxygen, and your blood isn't having enough oxygen in it. But when it drops below that, you're causing damage. Well, I didn't know that. Remember, I'm a arrogant, righteous, athletic male. I think now I'm doing pretty well. When I get to 90, when I get to 85, it's not comfortable, but at least I'm living, and I come back and put the oxygen in. So once I could, after 3 months at home, I finally could get up and go sweep some leaves off the deck. But I could only do that for 5 to 10 minutes before I couldn't breathe again. And I had to come in and plug in the oxygen machine. But it had pipes all over this, at the dinner table, at the bedroom, and at the toilet. Tubes went. And I put the oxygen in. And I measured, and it was like 72. And I felt so glad that I see how tough I am. I could get as low as 72 and still survive. And the doctor said, you jerk. Do you know what you're doing when you do that? You are damaging your body further, your lungs and your heart. We want you to use oxygen when you hit 90. And if you go to 88, that's okay, but don't go below. Anyway, if any of you have not been through all that, that's what goes on. And I now played 3 sets of tennis last weekend. And I have tons of side effects I won't even bore you with. Neuropathy on the feet, I can hardly feel. Problems in my lungs, problem in my heart. I can't feel in my fingers. I wasn't able to tell the difference in these weights in the beginning. Now I know we have to hang on to this tighter than we hang on to this. And when I couldn't do that, one would drop. Anyway, recovery is an amazing process. But listen to this, what happened in those 10 days. I was in a dome, a spherical dome, three-dimensional spherical dome. It had hexagonal sections all around the dome. I've seen pictures of this somewhere. Someone else has been there. I don't know why. I can't explain to you. I'm just telling you what my experience was. I was on the surface of this dome with my limbs tied in 4 of the 6 sections of my hexagonal section that I was tied into. Like in the bed, we had to be tied so we don't pull tubes out of everywhere. But here I was, and there were others up there, and I don't know scientifically who they were. I felt like they were the other people under ventilators in the same ICU unit. 8 to 12 of them, others also up there with me, not able to live on our own. Every second, all I could do, just like in the river, was say, I've got to live, I got to live, I got to live, I have to live, I have to live. I have to go back and live, to be alive, to breathe, to love my wife and my kids and her kids. And I'm not done with my work that I was called to do. After what we've seen on video in the last 2-3 years, I now don't do diversity training in groups so that a few white men are in the group might get some of it, while the rest do get some of it. I now want to work only on straight white men of privilege in the workplace who still don't get that we're wasting the most amazing asset we have, our human diversity. They don't get it. They still think leadership is power over and control, and they do it really well. No shame, no blame. I need to help them really understand what you heard me say. Yes, I have different skills than you or different responsibilities, but in every relationship, we are one. There's no power over or under. I see your soul, you see mine. I see your differences, you see mine. I love your differences, you love mine, because we have a common goal here. I'm just now coaching or facilitating, if it's a small group, just straight white men. No shame, no blame, no, you're a racist, no, you're just, what are you missing the opportunity of? How can you be the greatest leader you can be? What's keeping you from being your full self in this role? That's what I'm back to do. I had to come back to do that. Okay, up there in the dome, the next morning, I have 10 days of memory of amazingly different things we don't have time to go over. The biggest thing I want you to hear is, imagine this. One night after my wife was told, I don't know if we're going to keep him. And the next night after my wife was told, I don't know if we're going to be able to keep him. One night, I don't remember which, the lungs had failed completely, even with under the ventilator. They had to do serious stuff to go down in and scrape up. And I don't know what they did. They didn't know if they could do it. And the heart failed. They didn't know if they could do it. On those 2 nights, I remember in that dome, and after the first night in the morning, somebody came and, like, to the bottom, and they opened they put a key in the lock, and all the other hexagonal sections opened, and everybody went. Now, I thought then that they were all freed. And why am I still stuck here? For another 24 hours, I was just going, live, live, live. I've got to live. I've got to live. I've got to live. I am not dying. I've got to live. I'm going back to this and this and this. And the next morning, they came and unlocked mine. And instead of going, because I think all of the others died, I was the only survivor in the entire ICU unit, like that woman experienced. And I came back into this body in the bed with tubes still and able only to breathe that way. and they changed the chemicals from the ones that damage any memory of where you are and any physical pain. They kept the chemicals that kept all physical pain away, but they enabled the brain and the consciousness to begin to come back. And when my wife called and said, "My God, you're alive. You've been in the ventilator in 10 days." No, I haven't been in the ventilator. I said, I had no idea where I'd been. Yes, you have been. They had to learn to talk to me slowly, like we do with our wonderful great grandmother at 98 years old, sometimes, but whatever. You know what I mean? You have to talk with only what they're able to understand. People started treating me that way. And I said to my wife, "All right, I'm ready to go home. Will you please bring me my shoes?" And she had to go, "Yes, darling." It took 3 more months, remember, to be able to even get out of bed. But the learnings were amazing, up in the light and in the process of the recovery. For 3 months there and 3 months in a recovery place, and then another 3 months at home. And I would say, now again, I'm 95% back. I can't get the shots on the edge of the tennis court because I can't feel where my feet are going like I used to. So what? I'm alive and I'm breathing. So what? Okay.
Do you believe that what kept you alive, I mean, you were very descriptive in terms of the dome and being tied to something, sort of a hexagonal shape, and being tied, and then, this whoosh, after a number of days, it's as though somebody unlocked a door and these other individuals passed, essentially. And then you were on your own for a while, and then you actually came back to your work. Do you think it was your will to stay alive, come back, you had a purpose, etc., is what made the difference?
Yes, and all of it's true. All of it's true, including the awful chemo and what it did. And I even skipped, now that I was alive. Oh, because I had COVID, they couldn't take me to do the radiation because you're not allowed to go in and out. Yeah. So when I lived, they came right in and said, the day I lived, they said, "All right, now we have to put you in radiation." And I went, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, but instead of 5 weeks, we're going to blast you with all 5 weeks worth of the radiation in 5 straight days, one day after the other." Oh my God, I was so blasted with radiation. So yes, the answer is all the chemo, all the radiation, all the CBD, all the healthy eating, all the leaving sugar out, because cancer cells love sugar. Then all the chemicals, all the tubes, everything they did to me to save my life, scooping out the muck in the bottom of the lungs. 10% of the lungs are still damaged and will never return. So every time I cough, you can hear it and I can feel it, but so what? I'm alive and I'm breathing. So the reason I lived was all of those, in addition to my clarity up there that I am not here to die. I cannot die. I cannot leave my wife, my children, and her children, and I cannot stop doing my work with myself first and then other straight white men who don't get it. And I came back, and she said, "Well, now that you're back," we'd been together 6 years with rings but no paper, because we'd both been married before, and our prior wives had affairs. Remember, I mean, my prior wife and her prior husband had affairs, and so we're the only weird people on earth who love monogamy. We discovered that when we met each other and said, "That's it. I'm not putting up with any of that anymore." Okay, everybody each to their own, no right or wrong. But she said, "We have to get officially married now that you lived." And the first thing I said was, I've been asking you to marry me every morning I wake up and look at you. And I still do, just because it feels good. But I can't actually get married until I can get out of bed and walk to the toilet on my own, instead of having one of you clean my body. What we learned to go through, right? I can't get married until I can walk out of bed and go to the toilet on my own. Number one. And number two, actually, that's number two. Number one is I can't get married until I can breathe oxygen without a machine. Then I'll marry you. And that took uh, those 3 months.
How are
And
you?
then, sorry,
No, how are you with your cancer?
it's killed. Every 3 weeks, we go back and get tested with MRI and CT scan, and they go into my body to find out it was colon cancer. So they enter. Can we see it on the inside? Can we see it from the outside? No, but there's some scar in the tissue of the colon. We don't know if that's just scar tissue or it's cancer. We have to check every 3 months to see if it grows out. Every 3 months now for the last year, I've gone back for CT scan, MRI, and re-entering with a camera. This is an amazing experience if you get over the graphics of it. Ooh, there's a camera. Look at, oh, there's the scar right there. There's no cancer. And I get to do one on tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm getting to my next one. And they've already found last week the CT scan and the MRI, there's no cancer.
That's great. So let's go back to a comment and a question. When you had your first NDE, you talked about we've had prior lives. You seem to be very sure of that when you came back. So
I'm very clear of that. My current daughter was a prior life long ago. I've had a reading and I knew her long ago. And my current wife and I had a prior life. And my prior wife and I had a prior life, and we actually visited where we once knew each other in France. And I'm telling you, I believe it all. And it doesn't matter if other people do or don't, because you know why it makes me believe it? When I discovered about those other lives, not I ego, I soul, was the same person in that body. And every time back, I am the same person. And I've learned things. And another reason I know I'm the same person is my daughter came back and chose me. My current daughter chose me because of who she had met. She chose me to be her father because I was the only male she had known then that had not had any sexual interest in abusing her. I was the only male she could trust, that I just saw her and I loved her.
you're saying that your current daughter, who suffers
In her prior life with me, discovered that, and she came back to do all of her work, her bipolar recovery from her trauma, because I'm the only one she could trust.
what was your relationship with your daughter in the prior life?
in 350 BC, she was an oracle. Do you all know what that word means?
The knower of all things?
It has to do with how women have that certain extra thing that we men don't have. We have things they don't have too, all right? So this is no judgment, but we have this sense that women have something, and in the past they used to fear it. Men feared this intuition that women have, call it the truth and light. They had access to it that men didn't have, but it felt threatening, like it still does to too many men. Okay, this difference that women have. The minute you meet other women, you know how to relate to each other. The minute we men relate, we don't know how to relate to each other yet. We can do tennis or football or Marines that help us, but otherwise we start naturally, no shame, and tribal. Think of it as tribal. You're not from my tribe. Are you safe? So we have to kind of notice, are you safe? And if you are, then we can be fine together. But women, well, you know what your relationship with your girlfriends is like? It's got nothing to do with competition for love that you have with the man you love, if that's your style, okay, or whomever you love. It's different. And once we men learn that, and that the way you love the children that grew in your body differently and more than you love us who helped create it, when we really get that, then we're fine. When we think that there's a competition and you shouldn't love that child as much as you love me or that girlfriend, or it's like, whoa, we're in real trouble. God help us men around this earth.
I
Too
have to
many.
say, and I'm sure you know this, and it's obvious, but I realize I have to say, some women aren't safe to other women. So
Say
that
that again. No, wait, I lost half your words. Say
I
that
want
again.
to say that not all women are safe to all women.
Exactly.
As a woman, you have to also instinctively, well, it's not necessarily instinctive, it has to do with getting to know someone, but not every woman is going to be a dear friend.
You're quite right.
Acquaintance.
In fact,
And some are going to be inner circle friends.
that's right. In fact, to really oversimplify a stereotype way beyond where you don't have exceptions, take two normal shaped curves again, whether they're close together or not, I don't care. Okay. We men, mostly, if you really go back to just the tribal DNA, we are able to kill if necessary, either to get the buffalo or to save you. Until every male realizes we have such power that we cannot have any right to even touch you unless it is all loving. And I don't mean sexually loving. I just mean until we know our potential danger. I don't mean all of us are thinking about, I really want to hit. Most of us are going, what? I don't know what that feels like. But until we get that we have that capacity, we're not 100% safe. Women have an ability, a sensitivity to see how they need to relate in that situation way beyond what even we men know how to feel. In other words, we men are able to be so manipulated by you women in ways that are beyond our ability to know how to respond, except for the reaction. And you can do that to each other too, more than any man. So yes, we can kill and you can damage emotionally. That's so oversimplified. Forgive me, but I hope in a way we all go, yeah.
Let me get to Eva's question. How did the knowledge of many lives come about while you were in the light? How did you know this?
Okay, great question. After the first one, I felt that because of the experience in the light, I felt that's possible. That's all possible. So I took what are called readings by people who are either their various forms of mediums who either can connect with deceased people with you or they can figure out where you've been. And some of them are lying and manipulating, like people selling you a bad used car. But some of them are really deeply spiritual people who have that kind of sensitivity and are able to do that. And when I got a reading about my daughter, that said she was an oracle, and I didn't finish, but I was a what's the word for priest back before Christ? I was a monk of sorts. And I met her, and she was so threatening to those in power that she was put into this prison and sexually abused and drugged and sexually abused to keep her power from threatening the men. And I was a monk too, but I saw her and met her, and oh, I have to tell you this so what the reader said, just so you can feel what I said, wow, that makes sense. No wonder she's dealing with as if she's been sexually abused, but she hadn't in our life, except maybe that one person who took character. Maybe she was once, by that person, but that's all. Not her mother, not her father, not anyone else. But she acts like she's so damaged, and she's bipolar and everything. And where does that come from? And I said, now I understand why she chose her mother, because her mother's bipolar, and they understand each other in a ways I'm not able to. My chemistry is so balanced. I don't understand what it feels like. My daughter once said when they took her on and off drugs and on meds, she said, "Dad, is this what it's like for you to be this flat?" I said, "No." I laugh and I cry and I play tennis and I'm in the normal range, but they flattened you so they can now fix you. No, it's not like that. But bipolars can go extremely high and extremely depressively low. So anyway, that was her prior experience. I said, I know why she chose her mother, but why on earth did she choose me? And I skipped this. This was wonderful. That's when the reader said, well, you were one of the monks. And for a moment, I, of course, went, oh my God, really? Is that work that I have to do? I had to be open. Was I one of those who sexually abused her? And the reader said, no, you were the only one who didn't. You saw her soul and spirit, and you tried to get them to stop. You know, that somebody now is trying to get Putin to stop what he's doing, right? Maybe that's why they left, right? I tried to get them to stop. They couldn't. And so I reported them. And they were so angry at me, I got what's the word, anyway.
Defrocked, maybe.
Yes.
Defrocked.
Yes. And I was kicked out of the monastery. But this woman knew, and when she came back this time, God knows where she's been in other times. Maybe she's never come back until now. Maybe I came back 100 years ago. Who knows? But she came back and chose me. And when I pulled her out of her mother's body and say I once wanted to be a neurosurgeon, so I did some medical work, and they knew I wasn't going to faint, so I actually helped with the surgery for the abdominal surgery instead of vaginal. And I pulled her out and cut the cord, wiped the white wax off, and I looked at her, and I'm serious. This is exactly what I experienced. I not only looked in her eyes to see her soul and spirit, but 2 shots of white light came out of her eyes into mine. That was my experience. But since I'd already been out in the light, I didn't freak out and think this is a demon who's coming or something. I went, whew, you're here to change my life. And that's, and she has been.
So we're almost running out of time, so I just want to go through what we have left here. So Steve has a comment. He says, with regard to feelings in the 1970s, a friend and I were driving through the Scottish Highlands. It was a beautiful sunny day. At one point, we drove through a valley and we commented to each other that it felt really creepy and we wouldn't stop there. After 10 minutes or so, we left the valley and suddenly felt good again. We later found out that we had driven past the site of the Glencoe massacre. We speculated that the negative energy and sadness was still there after nearly 300 years. So there's some sensitivity there. Then we have a comment.
And had they noticed when they were driving there that that's what they were going through, or did they only learn that afterwards?
It sounds as though it was afterwards. Yeah, I'm seeing.
And if it was afterwards, and the question is, oh my God, what was that? Yes, absolutely, that was the same negative energy. And I've experienced that before myself. In an office I once had, there had been a ghost that came down the hall at 5:30 with pure anxiety, and it attacked my 1-year-old daughter, and she'd acted like that movie, that painting called The Scream.
Yes.
It's tough to act out. His energy was just destroying the energy, and I grabbed her and picked her up and I said, you stay away from my daughter. I talked to this spirit. And it's true, he had killed himself after his second wife died of cancer. Both of them had, and he was so depressed he shot himself in the kitchen, and his energy came from the kitchen down the hall toward us. And it was anxiety so deep, I'm willing to say we've all had moments of minor anxiety. I could tell this, I've never experienced anxiety like this in my entire life. This was terrifying what this guy was feeling, and my daughter still remembers it. So yes, that was true. Thank you for sharing that.
I think it's just something about Steve and his friend that they were sensitive to it. Perhaps not everybody who's driven through that part of the country experiences that. So there's something to be said about the people who are sensitive enough to pick up on it.
That's true. This sensitivity we need to honor. This culture does not know how to honor the people who are either deaf, dumb, blind, disabled, bipolar, manic depressive, that they have this ACDC, BC, but all these special people have an extra sensitivity beyond what we have, because that's what they needed to have to survive. They either see better because they couldn't hear, or they hear better because they couldn't see. And when I was with my daughter once in a restaurant, she was looking really depressed like this. And I said, Ashley, what's the matter? And she'd learned to tell me the truth. And she went, look around you. And I went, okay. She said, they're all faking it. And instead of thinking, what is wrong with my daughter? I realized she has such an extreme sensitivity that she can notice the extent to which too many people are not being their actual full selves. Their energy was just faking it. We need to trust the sensitivity of our special, diverse people and figure out what is it that they have that's a gift to us instead of putting them in an institution.
There's
Sorry.
That's okay. There's a little bit of a disembodied comment here because it may have been relevant earlier. Sorry, I didn't pick up on it from Bruce. He says, like a priestess or intuitive prophetess. Maybe his comment is about your daughter as the oracle.
Yes.
Lifetime. He's
Yes.
thumbs up on that. Okay.
My daughter, what had been an oracle in that lifetime.
Absolutely. Then we have a question from Carmen. What an amazing and profound story. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. What is your relationship with death now? Do you have any fear of it? What is death according to your personal experiences?
My personal experience is that death is that the body dies and the spirit, the soul leaves and goes to where we come from. And then it comes back into another body at some time. I never know why or how that decision's made by us, by the source. But I'm aware of 2 prior lives myself, and now I'm in this one. And so I have no fear of death at all. However, unlike some NDE people who say, it was so amazing up there, I wish I didn't have to come back. I don't know why. Next time I'm staying. I am the weirdest guy who goes, oh my God, I have no fear of dying, but I'm coming back as fast as I can because I just love living. I love life and I love breathing and I love love. And I love all the other things we can do with our human soul and spirit together in whatever way we're naturally fit to do something together that's mutually good for us both. That's all. Can we please have everybody on earth live like that?
Let me ask you just lastly, regarding your wanting to speak to white privileged males, certainly in the corporate space, and sensitize them to their ethnocentric views and how privileged they are, etc. Do you, that's a hard nut to crack, but a harder nut to crack is the idea that this came to you from an out-of-body near-death experience. Do you ever mention that to them as the beginnings of this path that you're on?
That's a very good question. Every coaching, every relationship we're all in, much less every professional coach or psychiatrist, we have to try to be in the shoes of the other. Yes, ideally we don't say or share anything. I had to learn in coaching, they're only certifying me to learn how to do these skills. That's what I got tested on. And then once we can do those skills, we can choose to use them with or without our other skills, our spirituality, my light, my near-death experiences, my raising a special child, my heterosexuality, my monogamy, my whatever. But we have to know when it's appropriate. So that's a great question, because just next month, we're going to do a national workshop on it. But we put all these white male leaders in 3 categories, which is no such thing. There's a spectrum. But one extreme is the one who said to me on his empty big desk, Lewis, when you talk about diversity, it reminds me, it's kind of like pissing in your pants with a blue suit on. It feels good and warm, but nobody notices. And I'm going inside going, what? There are some who, and in a closed door with a group of white men, I'll have one who stands up and says, this is bullshit. I'm out of here. What are you doing? Whereas, and they're tough. They're tough. I mean, when is Putin going to get it? They're tough. Then when there's a group of us in the middle, no, I'll do the good news. The few who really, really get it, and they're trying to be better leaders and all that, you deal with them differently and very openly. And if they're very spiritual, you go in that door, or you go in the door of how's their daughter treated, or you go in the door of the military. You have to go in the door of whatever door we need in order to start doing the work. It doesn't matter what door, but it matters only in that it's a different door. with a different experience, different language, but through whatever door we go through, we end up moving toward the center, the truth, the oneness. We all learn what we need to learn in order to get it so we can really be together, you know, and your learning is different than your learning and different than yours, or we have some in common. So the ones that are in the middle like that, I have to try to figure out, do I share any of the spirituality, or do I start with the daughter? Do I start with the business case? Remember, that's how I got the MBA. So sometimes I have to start with the business case. So the answer is, it always depends. Ideally, as you know, with every client, we're all different. If you treat everyone the same way, you're going to blow it.
You tried to penetrate the military, for example, or any of the services?
I personally have not been in the military.
But have you tried to talk to the military or any of the services in terms of your diversity?
Oh, yes. And the worst experience I ever had was trying to go for 3 days straight with the Texas Rangers. And I don't mean the baseball team. I mean the police in Texas, who are the specialists. Okay. That's what they're called, the Texas Rangers. And I knew I couldn't do it 3 days alone. As you can hear, I can do 90 minutes alone, or I can do a half day alone. But anytime you're training more than a half day or 2 or 3 days, you should be doing it with diverse people and different people, so you all lead differently. So I definitely took a Black woman with me down to Texas, who an expert I'd known really well, and we did the work together. And I promise you, never in 3 days did we make 1 inch of progress at all. It was terrible. Most of them were sitting there armed in a 3-day training. Not all of them, but when I left and was taken to the airport, I said, that is the worst experience I've ever had. Can you tell me what was the energy in the room that I couldn't get through? And especially when I did little groups, I did, lots of little groups, and I visited one little group with this guy. What was going on in that room at the spirit energy level? And I said, well, I maybe should have told you this before we went, but one of our officers was just last week called not guilty for murdering his wife. So we who believe in the law here, and what do we do with our feelings that I think he was guilty, or maybe he wasn't, maybe she caused it, or it was necessary? And the law now says, if you're acquitted, that was the word I slipped on, I didn't think of it fast enough. If you're acquitted, you're free, you're not guilty, right? What do you do with the energy now, whether we believe it or not? OJ, what do we do? Trump. Yeah, that was terrible. Yes, and the best experience I ever had, I've had lots of others that didn't work and lots of others that did, of course. The best one I ever had, I love saying, was there were about 15 women only. I was invited to be the facilitator or the speaker 3 times to all women. One was 15, one was 500, and one was 1,000, where I'm the only male in the entire room. And this 15, there was one woman in the back who, about 10 minutes in, she said, Mr. Griggs, I really have a problem with something you just said. So, instead of me thinking, well, I don't do anything scripted anymore. I'm so used, you eventually learn. You have a few things you want to do, but I said essentially, well, there goes whatever I intended. Let's be right with you where you are. Tell me more. And she told me more and stood up, and she was angry, and she told me about this and the way she felt when I said this or acted like this. You could tell, let's say that it was, I love to say now, if it was 10% or 50 or 90, I don't know, whether it was 10% or 50 or mine, or 90 mine, or 10 or 50 or 90 yours, I don't care anymore. I just want us both to be able to be comfortable with what it is. So I just took a breath and worked on my part and said, okay, thank you. Wow. I blah, blah, blah. And to make a long story short, after about 25 minutes of that, she had moved closer and closer and challenged me more and more. And I just learned with it and went with it. And afterwards she went, okay. It gave me a big hug right in front of her. And it was like, God, oh, that was so wonderful. And my ego never got in the way or got afraid. I was just dealing with energy and light and love and spirit and what was hers and what was mine. And thank you, thank you. Thank you for the learning. Okay, next.
So, Steve, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to add a little thing. In 1997, I was working in Ghana and doing a lot of field work. I was the only white guy. And we were in a remote village in the Volta region.
I see it behind you.
Yeah, we were sitting in I'll move in a second. We were sitting in a little shack, outside a little shack. And a couple came by and the father came over. He said, can our son meet the white guy? Because our son, he's albino and all the kids in school make fun of him because he's white. So I went over and met the little guy and we compared our arm colors and everything. And I was tan, so we were the same color. And the parents were so grateful because the little boy knew he wasn't the only white person in the world. He knew there were two of us.
Sweet. And it wasn't that wonderful. I lived in South Africa for 10 years and I've been to the bush with the animals, but I've been to the huts with where people never touched a white and they rubbed my skin to say, what's wrong with your skin? I mean, I know it's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, God.
Very good. Thank you so much. We've run over, so I hope I haven't kept you too long. Thank you, everyone. And it's
I love it. Thank you so much.
absolutely fabulous talk. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. I hope you've enjoyed it. We certainly have.
Oh my God, it is just so wonderful to be with people who are open to their experiences, to ours. I wish we had now another hour. I'd shut up and I want to hear all of your stories. How did you learn it? What was your experience like? Did you leave your body? Was it drugs or was it, an accident or was it, whatever? I thank you. I'm really touched to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. And very best of luck with your continuing work on sensitizing the world, especially the white male world to diversity.
That's all I can do is keep working on myself. I can't teach what I haven't learned, so I'm still the problem, but I love growing. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you. God bless. Thank you.
Okay,
Everyone, see you next time. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, I love it.
Okay, bye-bye.